August 1914. The summer stretched lazily across Europe, its warmth and light unaware of the storm gathering on the horizon. In the small village of Ashford, near Manchester, Private Thomas Hale stood on the porch of his family home. His uniform was new, boots polished until they reflected the morning sun. At 19, Thomas had spent his life amidst ledgers and timetables, the rhythms of the railway offering a predictable comfort. Now, a rifle hung across his back, a pack dug into his shoulders and sureways, and the world he knew felt impossibly small. His mother fussed over the uniform, adjusting straps, smoothing collars, her hands shaking slightly. His father stood silently, a man shaped by years of labor and responsibility, trying to hide the anxiety that tightened his chest behind a proud smile. "It'll be over by Christmas," he said, though his eyes betrayed the truth he could not speak aloud. Thomas wanted to believe it. He had to. Across the Channel in the Bavarian town of Regensburg, Wilhelm Becker tightened the straps of his uniform, careful and deliberate. 21, a carpenter by trade, his hands were rough from years of sawdust and hammer, but his eyes carried the same uncertainty Thomas had felt. He kissed his fiancée, Greta, lingering longer than he dared. The smell of pine and smoke from the nearby forests lingered on her coat, a reminder of the life he was leaving behind. "We fight for honor," he said, though the words felt hollow in his mouth. Greta nodded, trying to offer courage where none fully existed, her own fear hidden behind a mask of composure. Both men carried with them a sense of certainty. That they were on the side of right, that they would survive, that the war would be short. Neither of them could imagine the reality that awaited. The first weeks of mobilization were a mixture of excitement and terror. Thomas marched through the English countryside, uniform crisp, rifle slung over his shoulder. The sun warmed his back, but each step was heavy, burdened not only by the pack he carried, but by the knowledge that his life would never be the same. The rhythmic beat of marching feet and the hum of distant trains became a soundtrack to a world on the edge of upheaval. Wilhelm boarded a rattling train with hundreds of other Bavarian recruits, the wheels pounding against the rails in a relentless drumbeat. Conversations were hushed, filled with polite attempts to mask fear, while the scent of leather, coal, and sweat mingled in the air. Some men spoke of glory. Others remained silent, clutching letters they might never send. By October, both men had arrived on the Western Front, separated by thousands of miles, yet soon to share a similar fate. The landscape had been transformed. Wheat fields and villages replaced by trenches, barbed wire, and the wreckage of a modern war. Life in the trenches was defined by endurance, mud that sucked boots from feet, rats that gnawed indiscriminately, cold that seeped into bones and minds alike. Every day was a battle for survival, not against abstract ideas, but against the elements, exhaustion, and the ever-present specter of death. Thomas wrote letters home whenever he could, careful to shield his family from the full horrors around him. "The mud is endless," he wrote in October. "The rats have names. But we carry on. Tell Mother I am well, and do not worry too much." Each letter was a measured lie, meant to preserve hope. Wilhelm, too, wrote to Greta. His words spoke of monotony between bombardments, of fleeting moments of laughter with comrades, and his constant longing to return to her embrace. Both men clung to these fragile connections, their only anchor in a world gone mad. By November, the trenches had become their world, a network of frozen earth and misery. Rain turned the paths to slippery mud, and the cold gnawed at hands, faces, and feet. Rats were constant companions, bold and hungry. Every soldier developed routines, rituals to survive both the physical and mental strain. Thomas learned to listen to the subtle difference between distant artillery and an approaching barrage, while Wilhelm learned how to patch his coat and bandage wounds without alerting others to his fear. They shared small acts of humanity amidst horror, splitting rations, offering comfort, and sharing whispered stories of home. Thomas found camaraderie with Corporal James Whitaker, a man with a wry humor who taught him the unspoken rules of survival. Wilhelm befriended Hans Müller, a young medic whose gentle hands and quiet storytelling offered brief reprieve from the relentless suffering. December brought an unexpected moment of light in the darkness. On Christmas Eve, the guns fell silent along stretches of the front. The frost-covered air carried a strange melody, a German voice singing Stille Nacht, Silent Night. One voice became many, harmonizing across no man's land. Thomas felt a compulsion stronger than fear. He stepped out of the trench, rifle slung loosely, boots sinking into frozen mud. Across the field, Wilhelm and a few German soldiers did the same. For hours, enemies became men. Chocolate, tobacco, buttons, small tokens of shared humanity, were exchanged. A football appeared, and laughter, long forgotten, echoed across the battlefield. That night, the war paused, allowing a brief glimpse of light in the overwhelming darkness. The new year arrived with no mercy. By March 1915, both men faced the brutal reality of modern warfare. Artillery that shook the earth, mud that swallowed boots and bodies alike, and the constant procession of friends falling beside them. Thomas learned to move silently, to listen for danger, and to act without hesitation. Wilhelm mastered the same instincts, yet the terror remained, lingering behind every corner of trench and every explosion. Letters continued to bridge the distance between them and home. Thomas scribbled, "I think of home every second. I think of mother, of father, of Ashford. I try to hold on to my humanity." Even here, Wilhelm's words mirrored the same longing. "I carry your face with me, Greta. It is the only light I have. Every day I survive, it is for you. Remember me if I do not return." By summer 1915, the two men had settled into the grim rhythm of the front. Days blended into nights, mud, rats, and frost-defined existence. Comradeship became the lifeline, each man relying on the other for survival. Thomas shared jokes, rations, and moments of fragile hope with Whitaker. Wilhelm found solace in Müller's quiet stories, laughing briefly at memories from home. But the war never paused. Every new day brought fresh horror. Mortality became routine. Fear became familiar. And yet, despite it all, both men clung to the hope that someday, somehow, they would return to the world they had left behind. By the spring of 1916, the Western Front had settled into a grim, unyielding rhythm. For Thomas Hale, the days began before dawn, each morning a cold reminder that survival required constant vigilance. The trenches were a labyrinth of mud, water, and wood, constructed hastily and maintained by men who had little time for comfort. Frost and rain had turned the paths into a mixture of slush and mire, and the smell of decay was everywhere. Despite the harshness, small routines offered a semblance of control: repairing boots, sharpening knives, writing letters, and sharing meals with the few men who had survived each day. Thomas found a certain stability in these routines, and in the camaraderie of Corporal James Whitaker, a pragmatic man who had been through the first waves of battles and carried with him a dry humor that kept Thomas grounded. Together, they learned how to survive shelling, how to avoid frostbite, and how to find brief moments of levity in a world dominated by fear and death. Across the front, Wilhelm Becker faced the same endless trials. He had adapted to the routines of trench life, yet each day tested him in new ways. His friendship with Hans Müller, the young medic, became a lifeline. Hans had a gentle presence and a way of telling stories about home that made the darkness of war momentarily recede. Together, they tended to wounded soldiers, sometimes pulling men from near certain death. Other times, cradling those whose bodies had already given way. The war had taught Wilhelm that survival was as much a matter of luck as skill. And every day he clung to Greta's face in his memory, her presence a tether to a life that seemed increasingly distant. The summer of 1916 brought the Battle of the Somme, one of the most brutal campaigns of the war. Thomas's regiment advanced across a landscape of Trinderrind. Turerichaus chan trainors. Every step forward met with machine gun fire and shell explosions. The air was thick with smoke, dust, and the scent of cordite, and the cries of men filled the sky alongside the staccato rattle of gunfire. Thomas moved with Whitaker and the others, every nerve alert, every muscle taut. The first wave of soldiers fell before reaching the enemy lines, their screams etched into his memory. He pressed forward, his hands slick with mud and blood, heart pounding with the instinctual drive to survive. By late 1917, the Western Front had become an endless theater of mud, wire, and blood. The quiet moments were rare, and when they appeared, they carried an almost unbearable weight. Thomas Hale had grown accustomed to the smell of wet earth, cordite, and unwashed bodies. The trenches were no longer a shocking novelty. They were home, grim and unforgiving. His uniform was perpetually soiled, his boots thick with mud, his hands roughened by constant labor and clutching of rifles. Yet, even in the bleak monotony, Thomas found fragments of life worth remembering. He had learned to read the moods of the men around him, to understand subtle shifts in breathing, posture, and tone that hinted at fear, exhaustion, or despair. He became a quiet observer, noting the small ways soldiers maintained dignity, cleaning their boots, preserving a photograph tucked safely into a pocket, sharing a cigarette during the rare quiet moments between bombardments. Corporal James Whitaker remained his closest companion, the man who could still make him laugh with a sharp joke even when shells tore the earth apart. Together, they navigated the trenches, sometimes venturing into no man's land to retrieve supplies, or the bodies of fallen comrades, aware that every step could be their last. Across the front, Wilhelm Becker endured his own trials. The winter of 1917 brought relentless artillery, constant patrols, and ever-growing responsibility. Hans Müller, his medic friend, had become both confidant and guide, offering insight into both the physical wounds and the invisible scars of war. Wilhelm watched men break down under the pressure, and in doing so, he confronted his own fears and limitations. Each letter to Greta became a lifeline, a momentary escape from the suffocating brutality that surrounded him. "I carry you with me every day," he wrote, "and in that thought, I survive." The battles intensified as the years dragged on. The Allied offensives in Flanders, combined with German counterattacks, transformed entire landscapes into moonscapes of cratered earth. Thomas moved through these shattered fields, navigating barbed wire, shell holes, and the relentless barrage of machine gun fire. He witnessed friends fall beside him, often without warning, their bodies swallowed by mud and destruction. The randomness of survival became a constant lesson. One man could live through a storm of bullets, while another would be gone in an instant. Thomas grieved in silence, whispering farewells over the dead, and carrying memories as carefully as any equipment. Wilhelm, stationed on the opposite side of the front, endured similarly devastating experiences. He watched waves of men advancing toward his lines, the faces of the fallen etched into the mud and memory. He buried comrades himself, sometimes under the fading light of evening, often in darkness, and always with a quiet acknowledgement that the war demanded more than strength. It demanded an endurance of the spirit. He and Hans worked tirelessly, their shared presence a reminder that even in the worst circumstances, humanity could survive. Letters continued to tether both men to the world beyond the front. Thomas wrote to his family, words shaped carefully to soften the reality of his experiences. "I have seen too much, and yet I try to remember the good. I remember the streets of Ashford, the laughter of my sister, and the calm mornings before